Hello, today we'll be considering the pandemic's effects on the employment of Generation COVID. But first, we must consider who are Generation COVID. Well, COVID is a name coined by media outlets that pertains to 16 to 25-year-olds. However, this does not mean that this presentation will take a blanketed view of this group, as they are increasingly diverse and it wouldn't be fair to do so. But it was just an interesting consideration. This group has had to face unique hardships compared to generations before them. This is because the pandemic has hit them during a delicate transitional phase between education and employment for a majority of them. However, it has also become evident that the issues faced by this particular group have been undermined during the pandemic. Although this is understandable, the spontaneity of the pandemic led to a focus on those deemed the most vulnerable. Perhaps the lack of risk to young people, health wise, is not the same risk to their employment. The issue, therefore, is that the pandemic has caused severe and disproportionate effects on the employment of young people, not just in terms of unemployment, but also underemployment. Both will have scarring effects on their future, as well as the overall economy post COVID 19. This instability has contributed to the deterioration of young people's mental health, as well as potentially put their physical health at risk. These negative feelings towards the future are also exacerbated by the fact that the pandemic hit at a time of increasing distress among young people in regards to climate change, political adversity, social injustice, and this has created a new social consciousness for young people. And it is important to understand the pandemic from their perspective because they have felt increasingly marginalized during this crisis. Not unlike the sentiments felt after the 2008 2007 financial crisis, young people feel that the pandemic has highlighted pre existing issues and inequalities that were left unaddressed for far too long, and then in the time of a crisis, they were the ones affected. So far, many young people have felt that the uncertainty surrounding their future has not been addressed properly by government. This is manifested in a growing lack of confidence in the government to support young people on issues that were all too present before the pandemic began with, like I said, but also because they no longer address or adhere to the new social identity to which young people have adopted for themselves, and therefore it could feel like the dissonance between them just seems to increase. In order for any further policy to be effective, it must seek to address the new playing field that was irreversibly disrupted the lives of millions. So, the Resolution Foundation has found that 640,000 people between the ages of 18 to 25 face unemployment. This is predicted to be worse than the recession felt by young people in previous financial crises. This means that there is a significant portion of the labor force who are out of work due to the pandemic alone. This in turn reflects that unemployment in young people is predicted to increase to 10%, up from 3.9%, with some academics believing it could rise to up to 25%. This is especially worrying as there's no telling when exactly the pandemic will be controlled enough for these numbers to ease off, and they will also disproportionately affect young women, as well as young workers who may not be as skilled or as educated, may not have certain qualifications. The Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust study has found that workers under 25 are 3 times more likely to work in sectors that were shut down due to the pandemic. This includes hospitality, food services, retail, entertainment, travel, um, creatives, and this indicates that young people have been disproportionately more affected by the pandemic in regards to these specific sectors than other age groups. Moreover, unemployment and securing quality jobs are the third and fourth biggest issue facing young people. The Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust also indicated that not only is unemployment a primary concern for young people, but also underemployment. This occurs when people work in jobs that they are overqualified for. This further indicates that young people have lost access to avenues that would best suit them and promote their potential. And finally, those who experience unemployment for 6 months in their youth can earn up to 21% less in their 40s. This disturbing statistic indicates that this phase in a young person's life truly is the foundations for their future and will inform the catalyst that they will become. If these issues were to go unaddressed, there would be a disproportionately large amount of young people still feeling the effects of the pandemic long after the virus is gone. So, what caused this issue and what subsequent issues may this have contributed to? First, let's consider contributing factors here, or the causes, in the same way, interchangeably. Education. So it is no surprise that the education of young people has been severely affected in the pandemic, and students have been very, very vocal about this. As aforementioned, this delicate transitional period has been disrupted, but this translates to a lot of young people placed in a difficult position. Those who have had been wishing to start work or take provisional steps to start work, such as in internships, have had to rethink whether they should stay in education during the pandemic. Indeed, it is common during times of financial crises for young people to stay in education, and this was similarly seen in the 2007 financial crisis. However, due to the nature of the pandemic, those in education actually may be rethinking the cost versus the quality of online learning and could decide to take a gap year or try working instead in the meantime. However, this is not possible for everyone, as different social, um, economic backgrounds indicate that not everyone has access to these sort of experiences, and some may only be able to go to university once, and then once it's gone, the opportunity is gone for good. There has also been a drop in graduate schemes and placement opportunities. Again, this lack of opportunities matching the qualifications of graduates due to the pandemic is another sign of underemployment, which is the key issue that young people are concerned about. This also places less educated or less skilled workers at a disadvantage because they are now competing for the same jobs as graduates, um, which is effectively pushing them out of the market. And this correlates with some employment law considerations. So, due to underemployment, young people are more likely to work in insecure forms of labors. These include, but are not limited to, 0-hour contracts and flexible precarious work, etc., like a freelancer. Um, this is particularly popular in conventional sectors such as entertainment and the creative industry. Under Section 230, subsection 3 of the Employment Rights Act 1996, a majority of these jobs deem young people worker non employees. This is because the section sets out an ambitious threshold as to when a person is deemed an employee. More worryingly, this does not reflect the various forms of work that has arisen since 1996, let alone those that have had to arise due to the restrictions of coronavirus. The pandemic has highlighted the significant weight this definition carries, as workers do not have the same access to statutory sick pay, depending on their title. This is particularly worrying because those working in those shutdown sectors, when they are not in shutdowns, for example, when lockdown is lifted, are also those most exposed to the public. This is putting young people in increasingly difficult situations as they risk unemployment or contracting the virus with little to no financial support. This is especially worrying in Black, Asian, minority ethnic youth, as they are more likely to live in multi-generational households. Again, this is putting them in a difficult position where they could risk infecting family members but might be also core contributors to the overall income of that family. So ultimately, it's creating greater inequalities within a generation, and the rigidness of employment law, as well as the issues done to education, is causing further anxieties about the future and deterioration of mental health. And as mentioned before in the previous slide, Mental health is the primary concern of young people during this pandemic, and it wouldn't be if there wasn't a particular concern to be worried about it. So, a couple of responses. The government has responded in some good ways, some bad ways to the pandemic. Socially, people have taken up a clapping for carers, but also among the generation, there has been a new social consciousness among young people. And then, but the government is not really reflecting that mindset and that change. So, therefore, policy considerations that I've proposed kind of have to be considered within this mindset. So the first is community municipal investments. These are sort of investment based on crowdfunding. They're long term and they are issued by governments, and they're specifically tied to net zero projects. But I also believe that they could be used to promote digital infrastructure, as well as means to invest in local businesses of young people that are also environmentally conscious. The second policy consideration is to devolve more financial power to local authorities. These people are the most readily available to deal with the concerns of their constituents, and therefore they should be the ones um, on the front line to address their concerns. This will also increase public trust. This was seen with the mayor of Manchester. He received quite praise for sticking up to the government during the second lockdown. And finally, statutory protection for young workers. This should be especially for key workers during the pandemic, as well as those in those aforementioned shutdown sectors. Again, this is due to the restrictive nature of the law that needs to be addressed in order to move forward in a productive means in society. The policy consideration that I most recommend is community municipal investments. This is because they can arguably also achieve the other considerations to some extent. Um, they do give more power to local authorities, and by doing so, they are democratizing finance and putting the more focus on investing in local communities, which includes young people, and this in a way that is also environmentally sustainable, so as to also address that climate change issue that young people are particularly concerned about. However, no policy introduced will be effective if the social and political landscape does not offer spaces for young people to address their concerns. Considering the pandemic from the perspective of young people is vital for the development of society post pandemic. Why settle for a faulted future when there is an opportunity for change? Ultimately, the government has to adopt this new social consciousness of young people in order for them to feel like their voices is being heard. And by not doing so, by having such dissonance between the government and young people during the crisis, has just highlighted inequalities that have been there for far too long, that have not properly been addressed by the government by any means, and have come to a boiling point, so to speak, um, during the pandemic. And therefore, understanding their perspective could change the way society comes out of the pandemic, because it can become one that is focused on a sustainable and um, fruitful future for everyone, including young people. But young people are the catalyst for that, because at the end of the day, it is their future. And these are the referencing. Thank you.